Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Plastics Are Fast Facts official launch for 2025. I am Sylvie Aitken, Communications Director for Plastics Europe, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon to take you through some of our latest trends, data, and economic indicators. I would also like to welcome those of you who are joining us online through our YouTube channel and LinkedIn Live. Welcome. So for those of you who are new, maybe to some of our resources, Plastics Are Fast Facts is our benchmark publication on preliminary global and European production data and economic statistics. It is unique to Plastics Europe and something we're incredibly proud of, and you can get it every year through our channels. The figures we will unveil shortly. But before we do, I'm going to present you to my esteemed guests here on this platform today. Some of you may have already met Virginia earlier today, who has been hosting our panel and opening remarks. So Virginia, our Managing Director of Plastics Europe, who will be giving us a bit of a setting of the tone, the industry state of play, its outlook, its calls to action. And we're also joined by Dr. Katharina Schlegel-Toomer, who is our Circularity Director, and who will help give us a bit of a shape to what some of these figures are actually telling us. So welcome, both of you. We're very excited to have you here. And on that note, Virginia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea, as well. Warm welcome as well from my side to everyone here present. Thank you for joining our press conference to launch our Plastics Are Fast Facts 2025. As Managing Director of Plastics Europe, I stand before you representing an industry responsible for 90% of the polymer production in Europe, a sector that is essential to Europe's competitiveness, supplying automotive, renewables, batteries, healthcare, packaging, the list goes on. But more than that, we are a critical player in Europe's transition to a circular and net zero economy. I also speak on behalf of an industry in Europe under pressure. Let us be clear, we are facing tough times. Before I hand over to my colleague Katharina, who will present our data in more detail, I would like to highlight some key figures to set the tone. Europe's global market share has collapsed from 22% in 2006 to only 12% in 2024. This is a stark contrast with global plastics production, which increased more than 4% last year, with Asia producing over 57% of the world's plastics. In addition to that, our circular plastics production in Europe is stagnating, with approximately 15% compared to total production in Europe. This compared to circular plastics production in China, which has grown by 45% in the last 2 years. And all this reflected by a sharp decline in turnover over the last 2 years, and ongoing announcements of business closures and job losses. So what does this mean for the industry? Europe's past leadership in circular plastics is now being eclipsed by other regions, notably in China and the rest of Asia. We are at risk of becoming overly dependent on imports. Strategic sectors like the European automotive and building and construction supply chains might be negatively impacted. Without urgent action, Europe will lose a vital manufacturing asset, its strategic autonomy, and its circular transition. I will now hand over to Katharina, who will run us through the data in more detail. Please, Katharina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Virginia. As plastics being traded on a global market, I would also like to start off with the global production data and by zooming out of the situation before going back to Europe. I would like to start with the overarching overview from 2018 to 2024. And we can see that we have a steady growth of the global plastics production over the last years, now reaching 430 million tons in 2024. As we have heard, we had since 2018 a 16% growth and an annual growth last year of 4%, which is higher than the annual growth of the recent years. We see that fossil-based plastics production is still dominating on the world scale, but mechanically recycled plastics are rapidly increasing, also far above plastics made from bio-based resources or carbon capture-based resources. Specifically, the mechanical recycled plastics production has increased by 12.7% in the last year, now reaching up to 41 million tons.
Yeah.
I would like to look a little bit closer into the regional developments that we have already heard about from the global plastics production. We can see that China and the rest of Asia with 55% are in the lead of production, followed by North America with a 16.3%. That was in decrease in market share from the last year. When we look at Europe, it comes fourth, and we see that we have by now hitting the 12% of global market share, which is a figure that has almost halved since 2006. Of course, this figure in the overarching context doesn't come as a surprise to us, as it just indicates another indication that European plastics production competitiveness is declining. And that, of course, has a major impact then later on the European manufacturing basis. Of course, when we look at transitioning a system, it is not just important to talk about the overarching plastic production, but it's also important to look at the circular plastics production. For us, circular plastics are the non-fossil-based plastics, that is including all types of recycled plastics, plastics coming from bio-based feed sources or carbon captured and utilization. Here we can see that for this year in 2024, we have 10.2% of circular plastics production. And I would like to highlight that this is the first time we have more than 10% of the global plastics production coming from those circular feedstocks. This growth is mainly driven by increased mechanical and chemical recycling capacities that we find in China. And on the next slide, I would like to go a little bit more into the details of this. What we can see here is the regional distribution focusing on mechanically and chemically recycled plastic production. And there we can see that China this year has clearly taken the lead of the global production of recycled plastics. On the other hand side, on the right-hand side, we have put a comparison of the years 2022 to 2024 of the recycled plastics production comparing Europe and China. And we can see that in Europe we have a stagnation of that circular plastic production, whereas we see a vast decrease in China of 45% in the last 2 years, now reaching 12.5 million tons. This situation is highly unfortunate, and of course, when we look at the publications and look into the future, we are seeing that we have a lot of new recycling investments being announced to take place in China, including for chemical recycling, but we have a lot of disinvestment and plant closures in Europe. Moving away from the global scene more into Europe, I would like to start up by the overview of the European production. We have for the annual growth of 0.4% being more symbolic growth after the massive dip of reduction we have seen in 2023. Overall, since 2018, we are seeing a minus 12.4% decrease of European plastics production. Looking at the circular plastics production, we are at 8.4 million tons in 2024, with the returning to the 2022 levels for mechanical recycling, meaning we have a 2.7% of growth. We still see that the chemically recycled plastics production is stagnating. And we also see, when we look at the bio-based and bio-attributed plastics, a reduction of 25%, which is mostly driven by the bio-attributed plastics production decreasing. If we look at that, I just said in the previous slide, we have a worrying stagnation of European circular plastics production. If we look in the details, we had a stagnation of the, what I said, 8.4 million tons of circular plastics production since 3 years. When we look at the overall share, it's a 15.4%, and the apparent increase in the last 3 years is not due to an increase of circular plastics production, but to a decrease of fossil-based production that we are having in Europe. I would like to now come to some key economic indicators for our European plastic sector. When we talk about the plastic sector, we are always having the producers, the converters, as well as the machinery producers together in the economic figures that we present. Overall, we can say we have around 1.5 million employees working in the European plastics sector, with 50,650 companies active in the field. We did an analysis and a comparison of the last year to make some estimations, and I would like to highlight that we have, since 2022, 3,000 companies, around 3,000 companies closing down in the sector, and in the same time period, it's around 35,000 jobs that have been lost in Europe in the plastics sector. When we look at the turnover, we are below 400 billion in 2024, and in comparison, and within just 2 years, we have lost 13% of our turnover in Europe. With the geopolitical tensions on the rise, I would also like to show you some of the selected trade figures of our publication. Although our trade balance in value is still positive, we see that when we look at the volumes that we're having, we have a negative trade balance of plastics in primary form together with the products of minus 1.6 million tons. This is already the 3rd time in a row that we have this negative trade balance on volume, meaning the European Union is a net importer of plastics and plastics products. It's worth highlighting that the United States is our largest source of imports into Europe with a 19%, and it's our 4th largest export market for European plastics. This situation, of course, may further evolve with the changing global tariffs regime we are having. With this, I would already like to wrap up. So within our plastics, the Fast Facts 2025, I showed you that we have the global production, which is growing. We have a stagnation of the European plastics production, including the production of circular plastics, and we have a decrease in Europe for the EU economic indicators. And with this, I would like to hand back to Virginia.
Thank you, Katharina. I think that was crystal clear. I'm just going to try to see whether I can make this work. I don't. No, it's fine, Sylvie. I'll. Okay. If it works, I'll just. So it's undeniable that Europe's plastics industry is at the cliff edge. Survival is the urgent issue facing the EU's production assets, which are being dismantled and replaced by modern industrial capacity abroad at an alarming rate. Time is running out, and the outlook is very concerning. But there is still a window of opportunity for Europe to leverage our innovation leadership and get back on track in building the world's first circular plastic system. This will allow us to protect the strategic European sectors that benefit from secure local plastics supply chains. Let us not decarbonize through deindustrialization. We have our plastics transition roadmap, that can help turn the tide, because at Plastics Europe, we have a clear vision by 2050. A Europe that uses 65% circular plastics. A Europe with net zero emissions plastic system. A Europe with strategic autonomy, including production using plastic waste as our local feedstock here at home, supplying our electronics, housing, renewable energy, defense, and many more critical sectors. We can do all of this, but we need urgent support. The pausing helps here, but yeah, I think I'll just have to give you the clicking. Okay. So, to support our industry, Plastics Europe is calling for 4 urgent EU and national actions to restore competitiveness and stimulate investment. 1, tackle Europe's energy cost crisis. Add chemicals and polymers to the compensation list of the European Emissions Trading System, the ETS system, and reinvest the ETS revenues into our sector to accelerate our circular and net zero emissions transition. 2, strengthen EU legislation at borders, including on imports. Invest in customs capacity, harmonize controls, use digital tracing tools, require third-party certification for our imports to uphold European environmental and labor standards, preventing carbon leakage and unfair level playing field. 3, boost European circular plastics production and remove internal barriers within the EU. Encourage investment and market demand with ambitious recycled content targets, economic and fiscal incentives at the EU or member state level. Remove internal market barriers and guarantee a free flow of goods and secondary raw materials within the EU member states. 4, establish a chemicals and plastics trade observatory. Monitoring trade flows in real time is what we need, and deploy fair trade measures and support tools to protect the EU industry from unfair practices and irreversible impacts. Next slide. I would like to close by reminding everyone that plastics are and will remain an essential material that underpins European industrial resilience, innovation, and competitiveness. Keeping a sufficient level of local production avoids excessive dependence on imports and strengthens Europe's security and sovereignty. Only a competitive European plastic sector today will unlock the market drivers and investments required for our much needed circular economy of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. If you could take your seat, thanks. Okay, right. Well, some pretty hard-hitting data, some pretty hard-hitting messages, but also some messages of hope, some solutions, some innovations we hope for in Europe. So with that, we're now going to open the floor to the Q&A session. For those of you in the room, I would ask that you raise your hand, and time permitting, we will also get to those. Otherwise, we will get back to you later. Okay, so let's get started. Who would like to be courageous and ask the first question?
I think the message was clear.
There's a lot of digesting to do.
Yeah.
We have some ready on the side.
Okay. There are no questions?
I'm just checking with my colleague, who's checking online for some of the questions we received. Okay. Let's see who wants to take this one. Do downstream industries, for example, you've mentioned automotive, building construction, electronics, and so forth, share your concerns about the crisis facing European plastics production? And their primary concern to have access to lower cost imports? Virginia, what are you hearing from the conversations that you've been having with our members, with our value chain?
I'm hearing, look, I'll give you an average, so what I'm hearing from A, B, C, D, and talking to converters as well, our members. The message that I want to put forward, what I'm hearing, is diversification of supply chains. And I think that is very critically important for us, of course, but also for our converters. That is what I'm hearing. So I'll be just short there. And maybe, I don't know, Katrina, if you want to build on that.
Yeah, I think everyone who is active in Europe as manufacturing base is feeling the pressure, is feeling the issues, the demand crisis that we're in. So therefore, I think we have a lot of common also with our downstream industries.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear that also they have a need for a cost-effective supply, but also for a secure supply. And that is something that we have seen in the past in the crises that we had, that there is a value also in having your supplier close by and making sure that no matter what we have in a fastly changing world, be it kind of the COVID crisis we have experienced or trading barriers in different like shipment issues and conflicts around the world. So therefore, yes, of course, our downstream is also depending of having affordability of supply, but at the same time, they also need security of supply and market demand signals from our single market in Europe as well. So there, I think we're very much united as European value chain.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Bit of a tough question, but I think based on the panel session you had this morning, Virginia, and some of the echoes you were hearing from in terms of bold leadership, can Europe realistically regain its competitive role in circular plastics and kind of drive that engine forwards?
Yeah, it's a very good question, but that's why we had the panel session this morning as well, and I personally got very inspired by the answers, by the bold leadership. They were very clear in what our challenges were in terms of the energy cost, the trade situation, the demand pull drivers, etc. I think we all know what the challenges are, and we all know what the policy drivers are, what the solutions are. That was clearly formulated, and it gave me hope as well. There was quite some consensus. There's a value chain consensus as well. So with the courage, with the bold leadership, with the collaboration with our policymakers, with, of course, the customers and the value chain, yes, we can pull this off. And we need to be hopeful and have that can-do attitude.
Okay. Katerina, you deep dive into the grey matter of this report every year with your team. You're face-to-face with these figures, which can sometimes be a little bit stark and maybe unstabilizing. Your view from what you're seeing and what you're hearing as well, in terms of regaining a bit of our circularity and plastics control in Europe. Tell me.
So overall, if we have the global numbers, I think it is great that we also have more than 10% now circular plastics production. Just taking a step back, I think that in itself is showing there is a market driver for it, there's a business for it, for change. And I think that in itself is a good news. As Europeans, we are, I think, of course, tending to be hesitant now with the difficulties, economic difficulties, but overall, speaking as European, I think it is great what we have achieved in the last years. We have waste collection, we have sorting technologies, we have a circularity already started. There's a lot of know-how, a lot of creativity, innovative power here in Europe. So the question is not can we make it, but just how do we do that? How do we come together, create an enabling framework so that the change that has started, we are just continuing to grow, bring back the investments and bring that know-how here in steel and assets in Europe, use our single market that we are having here and really growing in Europe. So I don't see that negative. Of course, you said I always see those numbers every year, and I also see the great innovations. And if we just look around here at K-Fair, look what all of the companies that are also active in Europe can do and are doing and bringing to the market, I think there is hope.
Okay, thank you. So you've set out some clear policy asks, some clear drivers that are needed from our policy environment to kind of create the right framework for us. One of the questions we've had online is, do the EU and national policymakers, and I know we have a number of our regional directors here as well as our members, do you think that they accept that plastics manufacturing is a strategic industry for Europe? And how have they responded to these concerns so far? And I love this smile, Katerina. It speaks volumes. And yours too, Virginia. Tell us.
It's on the policymaker side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, again, more from an optimistic point of view, I think at the political level, I know from conversations, the crisis is understood. It is understood that we need support. And at the political level, there's openness to talk to us, to understand the issues, and there's an openness to help out. That is what we're seeing at EU Brussels, but that is also what we're picking up from the colleagues in country. So that already is a good thing. What now we are, of course, because of the urgency of the crisis, and of course we had a missed opportunity because we already said that a couple of years ago, but I guess we need to be at in front of a brick wall to then get policymakers to really move. So we are there, but now there's a bit of a disconnect now for the companies who need that urgent support now on the ground and need to feel an increase in their competitiveness in the business model and who are just trying to survive. So it's great that the political level understands, but of course we now need to have that connection with the administration needs to follow, and concretely at member state level, what can be done in the immediate to elevate some of your energy costs, ETS costs, create that demand pool that is needed. Yes, of course, we have recycled content targets in packaging waste regulation, that's great, but we're talking at 2030. What about now and the investments we're doing now when the customers need to follow us as soon as possible, right? So it's that supply and demand that we've also heard this morning where we have some issues. So again, on the policymakers, hopeful, but I think we need to do more in the coming days, I would say, weeks, to really flag that urgency and help as well to get the message across where we need the immediate help to create that trust as well. We've got a roadmap as Plastics Europe. We want to become circular, net zero. We've got it all. We've got the blueprints. But now it's for the policymakers to create that enabling framework now. And then, of course, there's immediate levers and in the long term. So we're all set. We all know what to do. So I'm very hopeful now that the action will follow. But yeah, there's a little bit of a sticky point, and hopefully it will be fast enough for many of our companies.
Sounds like we need to keep the pressure on.
Yeah.
Stay relevant. So I understand we have a question from the floor. If you could kindly state your name and your organization, please.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the super insightful presentation. My name is Sacha De Villers from the American Chemical Society. I was wondering how the US are trending in this landscape that you are describing right now. Are they in a similar situation as we would be in Europe ourselves? Are we struggling as we are struggling, or is there a different situation?
Katerina, shall I?
Yeah, we've got some numbers there.
Of course, we have Plastics Europe and have our knowledge base and activities base here. But if I look, I looked up front the numbers in comparison with North America. I mean, that's not US, but we look at North America as a whole, of course. Of course, it's clear that also 2006, the reference that we had, the market share relatively was higher. So I looked it up. 2006, it was still a little bit above 23%. So they had less steep decline. Nevertheless, also there we can see that in North America, the market share in itself is also declining. And I think it is also quite telling reading press releases in that regard that speak for themselves in the last year.
Virginia, you
speak
frequently with our American colleagues.
No, but it's just that the numbers are there, and the increase is really in China and the rest of Asia, both on virgin production, but also circular production. And then indeed, as Katarina said, but there are some different drivers, I would still say. There is a difference in Europe versus the US in terms of our need for competitive feedstock, I would say. And we're much more driven and against the wall in Europe versus the US. I think that is perhaps a difference, and that is also why we are stressing the point. Our circular ambitions are also our future competitiveness, because then at least we can use local feedstock, which is our plastic waste, to bring that back in our circular economies, right? So that the drivers there are also perhaps a bit different, yeah.
Any further questions from the group? I think everyone's just stunned and still digesting. Okay, well, I would like to quickly move on then as we wrap up this session, and certainly there'll be opportunities for further questions with both Katarina and Virginia as well, and Benny Mermans, our president of Plastics Europe, after the session is over. So I'd first like to thank you both for your insights, your drive, and your ongoing commitment. I might be a bit biased, but I do work with you every day, and I do know that we're definitely in charge of the Light Brigade forward, isn't that right, Benny? We are. But before we close, I would also like to announce the unveiling of our new, apologies, let me just fast forward here, Plastics Europe, sorry, the Data Hub. This is a centralized digital repository providing access to an extensive range of Plastics Europe data resources. It's unveiled today, it's just gone live. It's where you'll find everything you need to know about the fast facts, but much, much more. Circularity reports, our roadmap, reshaping plastics, and all the reports still to come. So much easier to navigate, much easier to find all the information you need, our positions, our campaigns. It's all there in one place. So we actively invite you to take a look. So you can simply scan the QR code and in you go. Go for your life. And on that note, I will wrap up. For any follow-up queries, any questions, please reach out to my fantastic senior media manager, Cecilia Kocinakene. Sorry, that was a very difficult pronunciation. Give everyone a wave, everyone sees who you are, so they can come and find you. Also, Beatrice Meunier, who is our communications director for Spain, who has been active and hugely important in getting this piece of work over the line. So a big thank you to you. And finally, don't miss, at 3 o'clock, Virginia will be back to host her last panel of the day. Keeps the energy going. Last panel of the day, but an important one, because we've had a lot of big data, big information, but we also need to look at some of these innovations and what's accelerating and where the investments are happening in the innovations to get us to our transition ambitions. So I would like to thank you all for joining, also for those of you online and your very inspiring questions. And we very much look forward to seeing you soon, and enjoy the rest of K. Thank you.
Thank you.